She looked him in the eye, without a single tear. The wine glass in her hand was the same one he had minutes before, raised to toast the perfect life they had built together. He trusted her. He loved her. And why, you wonder, would she do that? Why fortune buy secrets? For greed that consumed him from the inside and that now she used to consume him from the outside. His fall, slow and silent, was no accident. It was the culmination of a meticulous plan, a murder for money that was beginning to unfold before his eyes. What lies behind the doors of this mansion, the million-dollar inheritances, and the fake smiles? This is the story of a fatal betrayal. We always wonder about the price of ambition, but what happens when the price is someone's life? This is the story of Arthur and Clara, and the blood and fortune that brought them together. Are you ready to discover the truth behind the secrets? Do you see this world? The glitz, the luxury, the endless parties? It's the world of Arthur Sterling, a titan of finance, and his wife, Clara. He, the architect of his own empire. She, the perfect queen at his side. But beneath all this opulence there was a crack, a fracture in the foundation of their union that few saw. Many people ask us, how do these stories of fortune and power end? We promise, they're never like the movies. They're darker, deeper, and more personal. That's why if you're interested in discovering the secrets that rich people keep, just like subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss our next story. We exist to reveal the secrets that high society tries to hide. And the story of Clara and Arthur is one of the most brutal examples of that betrayal that we've already seen. But to understand the end, we need to go back to the beginning, to a love that seemed perfect, but was from the start a business. Love for Clara was never a matter of the heart, but of logic. She grew up with a burning ambition to escape her modest background. She attended elite schools on scholarships, observing from afar the world she wanted to conquer. Arthur, on the other hand, was the heir to a financial dynasty, but with a touch of rebellion and a certain fascination for people who, like Clara, did not come from his world. He was attracted to her intelligence and her calculating coldness, mistaking them for strength of character. They met at a charity art auction. Arthur was disinterested, bored with the superficiality of his social bubble, while Clara was there, meticulously researching the market, learning about the objects she would one day own. It was a business conversation disguised as flirtation. She talked about a piece's intrinsic value, and he talked about its market value. That initial conversation sealed their fate. Their marriage, in the eyes of the world, was the union of a brilliant mind with an empire of fortune. Arthur saw in Clara as a partner who could solidify and expand his legacy. Clara saw in Arthur the key to the life she'd always dreamed of. The facade of love was so convincing that even they sometimes deceived themselves, mistaking mutual respect and ambition for passion. Their mansion on the Malibu coast was a palace of marble and glass with a breathtaking view of the ocean. But the house was more than just a residence. It was a fortress. The walls seemed to whisper the secrets of clandestine business dealings and midnight deals. Clara spent hours in Arthur's offices, helping with organizing documents, but in reality, she was building a mental map of his entire fortune. Arthur was fascinated by Clara's intelligence, but he didn't understand her deadly greed that lurked behind her eyes. He thought her ambition was healthy, a reflection of his own drive. Little did he know that she wasn't building their empire, but hers. Marriage was, for Clara, just the first step in a much larger plan. The first cracks began to appear in small ways. Arthur bragged about his secret deals, about how he gamed the system. Clara, instead of reproving, subtly encouraged him, asking pointed questions that made him reveal more than he intended. She was collecting evidence, and he, in his arrogance, thought he was making her his accomplice. What brought her to him was the promise of a life without limits. He promised her the world, and she accepted, but with a silent caveat. She wouldn't just be a supporting character. She would be the protagonist. Their life was a theater, and their roles as husband and wife were just a cover for a high-stakes business partnership. Their high-society friends saw them as the golden couple, Arthur, the charismatic tycoon, and Clara, the elegant intellectual. No one noticed the coldness behind their party smiles. Their communication was almost entirely pragmatic, revolving around investments, social events, and family status. A betrayal was already planted in the soil of their relationship. It was an invisible seed which every day, watered by fortune and power, grew silently. Their marriage was a sham, a social contract they both signed, each with their own hidden agenda. It was a perfect partnership until one partner decided they no longer needed the other. Why do you think stories of wealth and power are so fascinating? Because they show us how far people are willing to go to get what they want. For Clara, going far meant abandoning her principles and diving headfirst into a world where money bought everything, even the truth. The murder for money, it wasn't an impulsive act. It was the logical consequence of a lifetime of unbridled ambition. The story you're about to hear isn't about a crime of passion, but about a crime of calculation. A cold, meticulous work of art that culminated in blood and fortune. Arthur's empire was built not only on pillars of steel and concrete, but also on secrets and shady deals. His business dealings spanned questionable sectors, from mineral extraction in unstable countries to investments in surveillance technologies. High society, with its facade of morality, preferred to ignore the origins of his fortune as long as they could enjoy their cocktails and parties. Arthur was the embodiment of success, a self-made man who had inherited much and achieved even more. His life was a constant celebration of his own power. The mansion, with its endless corridors and silk-covered walls, was the perfect stage for this performance. Clara moved around the set like an actress, playing the devoted wife and perfect hostess. She hosted dinners, commanded the servants, and became the center of attention. But she never stopped observing. Every conversation, every whisper, every furtive glance was a piece of valuable information that she stored in her memory. She was putting together a puzzle, and the pieces were the secrets of Arthur. Rumors about the origin of his wealth swirled behind the scenes. There was talk of a partner who had mysteriously disappeared, contracts that seemed too good to be true, and a fortune that had tripled in a single year. High society, with its insatiable thirst for gossip, loved to speculate. But no one had the courage to question Arthur directly. He was the sun around which all the planets revolved. Clara, on the other hand, listened intently, smiling and feigning ignorance while the gears in his mind churned nonstop. Arthur, in his arrogance, saw her as a trophy, a beautiful and intelligent woman who adorned his life. He liked to show her off to his friends, to brag about how he had discovered her. But Clara was not a discovery, she was a conqueror. The luxury that surrounded her was not a gift, it was a right she had earned. With every haute couture gown, every glittering jewel, she was reminded of the reason she was there: power. And for her, power was the most seductive thing in the world. A deadly greed hers was silent, subtle. She never asked for anything. Instead, she planted ideas in Arthur's head, encouraging him to take even greater risks, to expand his empire in ever more dubious directions. She made him feel like the decisions were his, when in fact, she was guiding every step. It was a masterful manipulation, a chess game where she was always 10 moves ahead. Betrayal was not an act, but a process. The marriage became a strategic alliance. They moved together at social events, smiling for the cameras, but the intimacy had long since disappeared. The mansion was too enormous to be filled by two people who had become strangers living under the same roof. Their lives were a sequence of commitments, not moments. The only thing that united them was the relentless pursuit of more. More power, more money, more control. And that pursuit for Clara had only one beneficiary. Clara began documenting everything she discovered. She didn't use a diary or a notebook, but a digital note-taking system, encrypted and hidden. She recorded every conversation, every agreement, every dark secret Arthur revealed. It was her personal dossier, an insurance policy against the eventuality that Arthur would tire of her. She knew that he, in his impetuosity, could discard her at any moment, and she was not about to return to her former life. The air in the mansion seemed increasingly thin. The silence between them, once just an absence of sound, was now filled with the tension of two people who knew the game was coming to an end. Arthur, for his part, was increasingly focused on his business and less attentive to the woman who shared his bed. He was blinded by his own grandeur, unable to see the threat growing beneath his own roof. It was the perfect setting for a fatal betrayal. Arthur's business dealings became increasingly risky, and he began to have problems with his partners. Clara was always there to advise, but her advice was like a siren song, luring Arthur to the rock where he would sink. She encouraged him to trust the wrong people, to make reckless decisions, to retreat into his own bubble. She was shaping his downfall step by step, without him realizing that the hand guiding him into the abyss was the same one that held him at social events. Their life was a paradox. On the one hand, luxury and public exposure. On the other, profound loneliness and a frightening coldness. They lived in a world of appearances, but what lay beneath was a swamp of ambition and lies. Murder for money, it would not be an act of anger, but of coldness. It would be the logical conclusion of a relationship that, from the beginning, was based on the search for fortune. The mansion's servants noticed the change. The air grew heavy, and Arthur's laughter became more rare. Clara, on the other hand, became increasingly serene, more controlled. She was the calm before the storm, the frozen smile that precedes winter. No one could have imagined that this woman, so elegant and polite, would be responsible for such an act of blood and fortune. Arthur began to become more reclusive, trusting few people, and the one person he trusted completely was Clara. He thought that ultimately she was his anchor, the only person who understood him. The irony of the situation was brutal. The person he saw as his safe haven was, in fact, the storm that would lead to his downfall. His fate was sealed, and he had no idea. Arthur's life became a play, and Clara, the director and screenwriter. She controlled the narrative, the dialogue, and the ending. He, the protagonist, played his role as a tycoon to perfection, unaware that his final act had already been written. She was ready for the next scene, where she would become the sole heir to this entire empire. What drives a person to plot their own husband's downfall? It's not hatred. It's something much more cold and calculating. It's the certainty that the reward is worth the risk. It's ambition turning into a force of nature, an avalanche that can't be stopped. And that force, that deadly greed, was about to devastate Arthur's life. Time was Clara's greatest ally. She was in no hurry. She was building the perfect scenario for tragedy. She was waiting for the right moment, the point of no return, where her action would seem the only solution. And what was that turning point? It was the secret Arthur guarded most fervently. A secret that, if revealed, would transform Clara from a devoted wife into her own husband's executioner. Arthur and Clara's story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that power corrupts and that ambition, when left unchecked, can become a destructive force. What they had wasn't love, but a transaction, and every transaction has a price. And in their case, the price was their lives. History was about to take a turn, and what came next would be the catalyst for a perfect crime. In her world of luxury, Clara was alone. Her true companion was not Arthur, but the ambition that consumed her. She lived a life of masks, and each day she fell deeper and deeper into her role. The real Clara, that cold and calculating woman, was hidden beneath the skin of the perfect wife, waiting for the right moment to reveal her true face. And in that moment, you will see, she was closer than you imagine. Their life was a house of cards, and Clara, the patient architect, was waiting for the right card to topple it all. The card came in the form of a document, a secret will that Arthur, in a moment of distrust and paranoia, had drafted without Clara's knowledge. He feared that his shady dealings would tarnish his family's reputation, so he drafted a document that would give control of his fortune to a charitable foundation, with a small portion for Clara, so she could maintain her lifestyle. The discovery of this will was the turning point, the moment when Clara's mask finally cracked. The will, kept in a safe in Arthur's suite, was not just a document. It was a declaration of distrust, a silent betrayal that echoed through the halls of the mansion. Clara discovered it by chance while searching for a tax document. The fresh ink on the paper seemed to scream her name, not as an heir, but as a last-minute guest. The small New York apartment she had dreamed of owning would become her sole asset, while billions would be donated to charity. The promise of a life without limits was shattered in an instant. Killer inheritance became, in fact, an inheritance of crumbs. Clara's reaction was not anger, but deathly silence. She took the document, read and reread every word, and an icy coldness took hold of her soul. Betrayal. Arthur's distrust wasn't just an act of distrust, it was a humiliation. He saw her not as his partner, but as a trophy wife, someone to be cared for after his death, not someone to take control of his empire. Her ambition, the force that had driven her entire life, had turned into pure hatred. The love she feigned for him had turned into a deadly greed uncontrollable. Clara began to reevaluate her position. She had dedicated years of her life, her intelligence, her youth, to building the image of the perfect wife, to becoming Arthur's confidant, the only person he trusted. And all of this for nothing. The revelation that she was merely an accessory in his life, an ornament to his fortune, was the spark that lit the fire. From that moment on, Clara was no longer fighting for an inheritance. She was fighting for revenge, and revenge in her world was a form of justice. From that day on, Clara's interaction with Arthur changed. Her smile became fainter, but her attention became more intense. She began to ask even more detailed questions about his business, his debts, his enemies. Arthur, in his arrogance, thought she was simply taking a deeper interest in his affairs. He didn't realize she was gathering information, assembling a list of reasons to justify his downfall, his murder for money. She watched Arthur with a predator's gaze. Every move, every word, every decision. She noticed the way his hands shook when he talked about a deal gone wrong, the way he turned pale when he got a call from a partner who was pressuring him. Her help became a form of subtle psychological torture. She encouraged him to risk more, to lie more, to bury himself deeper in a morass of legal and moral problems. She was setting the stage for blood and fortune. In her world of luxury, Clara was becoming a ghost. She moved silently through the halls of the mansion, and her presence, once warm, became cold. Arthur, his mind occupied with business and threats, didn't notice the change. He was too busy with his own life to notice the absence of warmth, of passion, of everything that had once united the couple, even superficially. The distance between them became an abyss that Clara was preparing to be Arthur's grave. A fatal betrayal. What she felt was the trigger. He who had promised her the world now limited her to an apartment and a monthly income. It was a personal affront, a blow to her ego. She was no longer a woman seeking a better life. She was a woman who had been betrayed and who would do anything to get revenge. The price of fortune, she knew, wasn't just money. It was power. It was respect. It was the certainty that she would never return to the life she tried to escape. Clara spent sleepless nights thinking over every detail of the plan. She anonymously hired a private detective to thoroughly investigate Arthur's business dealings. She needed proof, a motive that could justify her actions, that could convince the world and herself that she was not a murderer but a victim of greed and secrets of her husband. She was building the perfect narrative, where she would be the heroine and Arthur, the villain. The digital diary, which had once been an insurance policy, became her weapon. She recorded not only Arthur's affairs but also his weaknesses, his fears, his routines. She was creating an instruction manual for Arthur's death, a script she executed to perfection. The killer inheritance became her only motivation, the only reason she woke up every day. Her ambition had turned into an obsession, and her obsession into a plan. The decision was made. Arthur would die. The only question was how, and Clara, with her brilliant mind and her cold calculation, would leave nothing to chance. The murder for money, it wouldn't be a crime of passion, but a crime of reason, an act of justice, as she convinced herself. She wasn't taking a man's life. She was reclaiming what was rightfully hers. At least that's what she told herself in the silence of the night, as she stared at her reflection in a mirror and saw a woman she no longer recognized. With the will in hand, Clara felt the urgency to act but not the rush. Haste was the enemy of perfection, and the planned murder for money should be impeccable. The first step was what she had already begun, hiring a private investigator, a discreet and experienced former police officer. She instructed him to investigate Arthur's affairs, not to ruin him, but to create a dossier of scandals and crimes that could be used as motive if something went wrong. The goal was not to expose Arthur, but to understand his vulnerabilities, and the vulnerabilities were many. The detective, using Clara's anonymity, began to unearth the web of lies and illegalities that Arthur had built. Deals with shadowy figures in the financial underworld, money laundering in tax havens, extortion of partners, and even involvement with the Russian mafia. Arthur's secrets weren't just trade secrets, but crimes that could land him in prison for life. With each new report from the detective, Clara's conviction grew stronger. She wasn't killing a good man. She was ridding the world of a criminal. Life in the mansion, meanwhile, continued its drama. Clara and Arthur interacted with polite coldness. Clara's smile was an impenetrable shield. The looks she gave Arthur were not of love, but of analysis. She observed his routine, his alcohol consumption, the medication he took for insomnia. She was searching for the perfect method, the one that would leave no trace, that would look like an unfortunate accident, fatal betrayal. It was a game of patience, and Clara was the most skilled player. Arthur, for his part, was increasingly tense. The pressure of his business, the threats from his partners, the constant stress. He sought solace in his alcohol and in his wife. Clara, with the mastery of an actress, consoled him, but with the coldness of a nurse. She listened to him, offered advice that led him down dead ends, and encouraged him to drink more. She was poisoning Arthur's soul before she poisoned his body. Deadly greed, hers was the disease, and Arthur, the terminal patient. Clara's digital diary became more detailed every day. She recorded not only Arthur's crimes, but also his routines, his habits, and most importantly, his final wishes. She discovered that he had a hereditary heart condition, a condition he kept secret and refused to treat. This information was the key piece to her puzzle. The accident wouldn't be an accident. It would be a heart attack, an ending that seemed inevitable for someone living the life he did. The plan began to take shape. Clara decided that the perfect moment would be during Arthur's birthday party. It would be a grand event, with hundreds of guests, witnesses to his happiness. She would make sure that blood and fortune would become a spectacle, where everyone present would be unknowingly complicit in the crime she would commit. The irony of the situation was cruel. Arthur would die at his own party, surrounded by people who envied and respected him, but who were unaware of the truth behind the fortune. Arthur's trust in Clara was his greatest weakness. He confided everything to her, from problems with business partners to his fears. He didn't realize she was listening to every word with clinical coldness, like a doctor listening to the symptoms of a hopeless patient. Betrayal, hers, was complete, total. She was no longer Arthur's wife. She was his tormentor. Preparations for Arthur's birthday party began. Clara oversaw every detail from the menu to the guest list. She seemed like the perfect hostess, the woman who would do anything to make sure her husband had an unforgettable birthday party. And unforgettable it would be. She knew that for Arthur it would be his last party, and she, the perfect hostess, would be the one to truly celebrate. Clara's plan was so subtle that, if it weren't for the digital diary and the detective's dossier, it would have seemed insane. She had planned not only Arthur's death, but the narrative that would follow. She would be the devastated widow, the heiress who would take control of her husband's empire, the woman who, despite her grief, would be strong enough to carry on his legacy. Killer inheritance, it would not just be an inheritance, but an achievement. The silence between them, once just an absence of sound, was now filled with the tension of two people who knew the game was coming to an end. Arthur, for his part, was increasingly focused on his business and less attentive to the woman who shared his bed. He was blinded by his own grandeur, unable to see the threat growing beneath his own roof. It was the perfect setting for a fatal betrayal. Clara already had her weapon, a colorless, odorless, slow-acting poison that mimicked the symptoms of a heart attack. She bought it anonymously, on an illegal online marketplace. It was delivered discreetly, in an empty jewelry box. The irony of the situation did not escape her. The most expensive and luxurious object in the mansion held the dirtiest and deadliest secret. Deadly greed, hers had reached its peak. Clara's plan was a work of evil art. She thought of every detail, every movement, every word. She rehearsed her reaction, her expression of shock, her fake tears. She was ready for the performance of her life, where the stage was her mansion, the audience was high society, and the protagonist, her own husband, would die without knowing that the hand that poisoned him was the same one he held at social events. Clara's story is a reminder that evil is not always obvious. It can hide behind a smile, a designer dress, a life of luxury and opulence. The murder for money is not a crime of passion, but of calculation. And for Clara, each calculation brought her closer to her fortune and further away from your humanity. What would you do if you had to choose between your conscience and your dream? The night of August 14th, 2025. Arthur Sterling's Malibu mansion was ablaze with light and sound. Arthur's birthday party was a royal affair. The air was heavy with the scent of exotic flowers, the sound of fake laughter, and the hubbub of high society. Clara, in a ball gown that seemed to have been sculpted from her skin, was the perfect hostess, the queen of her castle. The betrayal she was about to commit would be the culmination of a lifetime of preparation. Arthur, the center of attention, was at the height of his arrogance. He boasted about his business, his fortune, and his wife. Clara, with a 1,000-megawatt smile, listened and praised him, but in her eyes, an icy coldness settled. She knew Arthur's performance was coming to an end. The killer inheritance was just one step away from becoming reality. She moved among the guests, mingling with the crowd, while the countdown to the murder for money unfolded in her mind. The moment the guests began to gather for the toast, Clara acted. She went to the kitchen where the waitstaff was preparing the champagne flutes. She ordered a glass of red wine for Arthur, claiming that the champagne did not suit his taste. The glass, filled with wine, was the vessel of death. The poison, colorless and odorless, was mixed with the wine with the precision of a surgeon. Her hand, steady, did not tremble. Her deadly greed was her only emotion. Clara returned to the hall, wineglass in hand. Arthur's gaze lit up when he saw her. In his arrogance, he thought she was there to save him from the monotony of the party. He didn't realize she was there to save him. He took the glass, raised it in a toast, and before drinking, looked into her eyes with a smile of love and gratitude. His gaze was the last ray of light in her life, before darkness consumed him. The fatal betrayal became a theatrical act, where the actors were the victims and the executioners. He drank the wine all at once with the joy of one who had nothing to fear. The poison's effect was subtle. Arthur continued to talk, to smile, to boast. But cold sweat began to run down his forehead. His breath became shallow and his face pale. His hand, which had previously trembled with nervousness, now trembled with the impact of the poison. Blood and fortune were becoming a reality. Arthur's life was slipping away and he had no idea. Arthur's fall wasn't dramatic. It was silent, as if he was getting tired and deciding to lie down on the ground. The music continued to play for a few seconds, people continued to talk, but Clara's silence became a scream. She, with the mastery of an actress, let out a cry of panic and ran to him. Her tears, once false, were now tears of relief. Her husband, the obstacle to her fortune, was dead. Panic spread through the party. The music stopped and the guests gathered around Arthur. Clara, kneeling beside him, her head resting on his chest, sobbed. "Arthur, no, please no," she screamed. But in her mind she thought, finally. Her performance was so convincing that no one suspected she was the killer. She was the devastated widow, the woman who had lost the love of her life. The secrets of her crime were hidden behind her crocodile tears. Paramedics arrived quickly, but it was too late. Arthur Sterling was dead. The cause of death, for everyone present, was a massive heart attack. A stressful life, the pressure of business, a weak heart. Clara's narrative fit perfectly. The murder for money wasn't just a crime. It was a work of art, a story she had written that was now becoming her reality. The life she had dreamed of was just one step away from becoming a reality, and the only obstacle was his death. The scene was chaotic, but Clara was in control. She stood up, wiped away her tears, and with a voice of authority, ordered the guests to leave. She was the new queen of that castle, and her first order of business was for everyone to go home. She became the strong and courageous widow, the woman who would take control of her husband's empire. The murderous inheritance plan was underway, and nothing, not the police, not guilt, would stop her. Arthur's death for everyone was a tragedy. For Clara, it was a liberation. She sat in an armchair, looked at her husband's body, and on his face an expression of relief, peace, and satisfaction. The money, the fortune, the power, all of it was hers now, the price she had paid with Arthur's life. And for her, it was worth it. Their love story was over, and her story of power and wealth was just beginning. The fatal betrayal became the beginning of a new life. The police arrived, but the investigation was quick and superficial. The medical report confirmed a heart attack. There were no signs of violence or poisoning. The poison, slow-acting and undetectable, had done its work. Clara, with the help of her lawyer, dealt with the police with the serenity of a woman with nothing to hide. She was the perfect widow, the woman the world would admire, and no one but her would know the truth. The secrets were safe. Arthur Sterling's death was not just a personal tragedy. It was an earthquake that shook high society. Newspapers and news reports spoke of the man who had everything, and his sudden death. The official narrative, orchestrated by Clara and her lawyer, was that it was a massive heart attack brought on by years of business stress. The police, with the medical report in hand and no evidence of foul play, closed the case in record time. To the world, Arthur had died of natural causes. For Clara, the first part of her plan, murder for money, had been executed perfectly. Arthur's funeral was a display of power and hypocrisy. The mansion, once the scene of parties, was now filled with people who were actually there to see the widow and speculate about her future. Fortune of Arthur. Clara, dressed in black and with a subtle veil, played the role of the inconsolable widow with Oscar-worthy perfection. Her sobs seemed to come from the depths of her soul, but inside, she was calculating every step, every look, every word. Deadly greed was the only real thing in that theater of false emotions. After the funeral came the time for the reading of the will. The living room, where Arthur had held his last party, was now filled with lawyers, bankers, and Arthur's family. Arthur's lawyer, an elderly, conservative man, read the will in a solemn voice. Arthur's family expected the fortune to be divided, but the will that was read was the one Clara had discovered in one of her files, the one Arthur had drawn up after the wedding. Clara, with a look of surprise, discovered that she was the sole heir to the fortune of Arthur. The killer inheritance was complete. Arthur's family protested, but the document was legal. The signatures, the witnesses, everything was in order. Clara, with the help of her lawyer, handled the situation with professional coolness. She regretted Arthur's distrust of his own family, but promised that she would continue his legacy. Fatal betrayal. What Arthur had planned for her became, ironically, her undoing. The will, her last attempt at control, became her death sentence. In the days that followed, Clara moved quickly to take full control of Arthur's empire. She fired Arthur's longtime advisors, hired her own, and began restructuring the company. She wasn't just a wealthy widow. She was a CEO, a titan of finance, the queen of her own empire. The betrayal hers was not just one act, but a series of carefully orchestrated events that brought her to the top. And she, at the top, felt more powerful than ever. The luxury of the mansion, once a stage for her performances, was now her home. She could sit in any chair, look at any landscape, and know it was all hers. But with possession came paranoia. She began to see ghosts. Her reflection in the mirror, her shadow on the wall, the sound of a glass falling in the kitchen. Everything reminded her of blood and fortune that she had conquered. The fortune was a prison, and the secrets that she guarded were her jailers. Clara tried to fill the void with more power, more money, more parties. But with every party, every toast, every fake smile, she felt more alone. The life she had dreamed of was not what she had imagined. The power and wealth she had achieved were like a drug. She wanted more, but the price to pay was becoming higher and higher. Her crime haunted her, and she could not escape. Her story, the story of a woman who killed for money, became the story of a woman who had everything yet had nothing. A killer inheritance didn't bring the peace she'd hoped for. The silence of the mansion, once the sound of her conquest, was now the sound of her loneliness. The sound of her footsteps in the empty hallways was the sound of her soul fading away. Her plan was perfect, but the outcome wasn't what she'd hoped for. Fortune. The dream she had dreamed of her entire life became her greatest punishment. And her fall, you'll see, would be as spectacular as her rise, because what money can't buy is peace of mind. And Clara, in her gilded prison, was about to find this out the hard way. What the world saw was a successful woman, the widow who inherited a fortune and transformed it into an even greater empire. But what no one saw, in the silent early mornings of the mansion, was Clara lying on her silk bed, her eyes open and fixed on the ceiling. The peace she had imagined did not come. In its place came paranoia, nightmares, and the unbearable weight of guilt. Her gilded prison was as luxurious as it was suffocating, and the secrets that she guarded were her own executioners. The nightmares were always the same. Arthur, with the same expression of panic and surprise he had at the moment of death, chased her through the halls of the mansion. In his dreams, he did not die silently. He screamed her name, revealing the fatal betrayal for all the guests. Clara would wake up with her heart racing, cold sweat running down her forehead, the sheets soaked. Money could buy everything except peace of mind. The mansion, which had once been the stage of her triumph, was now a labyrinth of memories. Every room, every object, every shadow reminded her of Arthur. The armchair where he read the newspaper, the piano where he played poorly, the glass of wine he drank. The blood and fortune was everywhere, staining her new empire. Clara tried to run from the memories, but they haunted her, whispering in her ears, "You are a murderer." Loneliness became her only companion. Her friends, the same ones who envied and praised her, no longer sought her out. Her wealth intimidated them, and secrets made her inaccessible. Clara was at the top, but at the top, solitude is the only landscape. The deadly greed had taken her to a place where she had everything, but no one. And she, who had always wanted to be in control of everything, was losing control of herself. She began to drink more. Wine, the same thing that had been her murder weapon, became her refuge. She drank to silence the voices, to forget the nightmares, to escape her own conscience. But alcohol didn't free her, it only imprisoned her more. She became a prisoner in her own home, with her own fortune like your cell. Your life, which was once a search for freedom, has become a search for oblivion. A killer inheritance, it wasn't the liberation she'd dreamed of. It was a burden, a curse. The power she'd gained was a weight, and her wealth a constant reminder of her crime. Her life, which seemed like a fairy tale to the outside world, was actually a nightmare. She had everything except the one thing that mattered: peace. And her downfall, you'll see, was just a step away. The letter arrived on a rainy morning. It had no return address or return address. The handwriting was old and formal, and the paper was of high quality. Clara opened the letter with trembling hands, paranoia consuming her completely. The letter contained only one sentence: "I know what you did." Clara's world fell apart. Her paranoia turned to panic. She thought of all of Arthur's enemies, all of his betrayed partners, all of his competitors. Who knew? Her betrayal wasn't perfect. The murder for money had not been a secret forever. The fortune that she had achieved was at risk. And her fall, you will see, would be as dramatic as her rise. That afternoon, Arthur's lawyer, the same one who had read the will, called her. His voice was cold, emotionless. He invited her to a meeting to discuss a last-minute matter. Clara, with the letter in her hand, knew the game was up. Fatal betrayal. What she had committed was about to be revealed. And she, the queen of her empire, was about to fall. The lawyer, in his office, received her with the same coldness. He placed on the table a leather diary with the name Arthur Sterling engraved in gold. "Your husband, madam, gave me this diary a year ago, with clear instructions to open and reveal it only if his death was ruled accidental." The diary contained all the secrets of Arthur, including the plan of killer inheritance that he had planned for her. The diary revealed Arthur's distrust of Clara, his certainty that she would kill him for his fortune. He had drawn up a new will, one that allocated all his fortune to a charitable foundation with a single clause. In case of her death other than accidental, this will shall be void, and the former will, which benefits Clara, shall be annulled. The diary also revealed Arthur's suspicions about a slow-acting poison, which he was certain Clara would give him. Blood and fortune that she had conquered was not hers. Clara, panicked, tried to lie, to deny, to defend herself. But the lawyer interrupted her. "Ma'am, I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to carry out my client's last wishes. In the event of his accidental death, the original will benefiting her would be read. In the event of his non-accidental death, he instructed me to reveal this diary to the police and the media, and to give all the money to a charitable foundation." Murder for money had not led her to freedom, but to prison. The lawyer, without a single emotion, handed her a copy of the diary. "You have a choice, madam. Confess and perhaps get a lighter sentence, or wait for the police to discover the truth on their own." Clara looked at the diary, at the lawyer's face, and at her own reflection in the window. She saw the woman she had become, a murderer, a criminal, a prisoner of her own ambition. Her downfall, she knew, was inevitable. Clara confessed. The police, with the diary in hand and Clara's confession, reopened the case. Arthur's body was exhumed, and the poison, which had previously gone undetected, was now present in his system. Clara's trial was a media spectacle. The woman who had been the queen of high society was now the most hated criminal in the country. Deadly breeders had taken her to prison, and her fortune for the charitable foundation. Clara's life, the life she had dreamed of her entire life, ended in a prison cell. She had achieved power, wealth, fortune, but she had lost her freedom, her peace, and her humanity. Her plan was perfect, but she had paid the price with her own life. And so the story of Clara Sterling, the woman who killed her own husband for money, comes to an end. Her relentless pursuit of a life of luxury and power led her to a place where the only view was of bars and concrete walls. She had conquered the world, but in her conquest, she had lost her soul. Fortune, that she had dreamed of all her life, became her prison, and the secrets that she kept, her punishment. Clara's story is a cruel reminder that ambition, when left unchecked, can become a destructive force. The power and wealth she so desired were fleeting. What she achieved with betrayal of her husband, she lost with her confession. Her life, which seemed like a fairy tale to the outside world, was, in fact, a nightmare. And she lived that nightmare until the end of her days. What would you do for a fortune? What are you willing to sacrifice for a life of luxury and power? Clara's story shows us that money can buy everything except the one thing that truly matters: peace of mind. And without it, there is no wealth, no power, no fortune that can save you. The real killer inheritance, it wasn't Arthur's fortune, but the guilt she carried to the end. The story of Arthur and Clara is a warning. A reminder that greed is a slow-acting poison that corrodes the soul and destroys everything it touches. Murder for money was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a tragedy that unfolded in a prison of marble walls and steel bars. What really matters, history shows us, is not what you have, but what you are. And Clara, in her deadly greed, had become nothing. And we come to the end of the story of fatal betrayal, Murder for money and blood and fortune. Clara Sterling's story teaches us that the desire for wealth and power can be a path of no return, leading to a tragic fate. The life she dreamed of became her own prison, and secrets that she kept consumed her completely. But what about you? What did you learn from this story? If you enjoyed unraveling the mysteries behind money and power, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, activate the bell, and like this video. We exist to show you that, behind the headlines and fake smiles, there is a much darker and more fascinating reality. Killer Inheritance Clara's is just one of the many stories that money can buy. Leave your opinion in the comments. Do you think the deadly greed was Clara justified? Would you do the same as her for a fortune? Share this video with a friend who loves a good crime and mystery story. We want to hear your feedback and interact with you so we can bring you more stories like this. Clara's story is a reminder that money can buy mansions, cars, and jewelry, but it cannot buy peace of mind. And without it, life, no matter how luxurious, is worthless. What's more important to you? The power to have a fortune, the freedom of not needing one. Think about it.